There's an identified white female trespassing on our common area. She's hostile and refusing to leave.
That's the 911 call the HOA president of Heron Point at Jordan Lake placed at 9:47 on a Saturday morning in April. 2 patrol cars rolled up my gravel drive within 15 minutes. The trespasser she described was my wife, Maren, out in jeans and a denim shirt, retrieving our German short-haired pointer from the corner of our own pasture. Chair Ann Vossler had spent 18 months sending us complaint letters, photographing our barn, and pretending her HOA covenants applied to my 11-acre family farm. She thought my wife was a stranger she could have detained on camera. What she did not know was that Maren Kincaid had been sworn in 6 weeks earlier as the county sheriff of Chatham County, that the badge was clipped to her belt under her jacket, and that the call itself was about to become Sharon's 17th false report on file. Tell me below, would you have stopped her or let her keep talking? The farm sat on 11 acres of red Carolina clay, where Old Man's Branch ran into the western shore of Jordan Lake. My granddaddy Bo Kincaid bought it in 1948 with money he saved cutting timber for the Army Corps of Engineers when they were still planning the lake. My daddy, Hank Kincaid, came back from Korea in 1956 with a Purple Heart and the start of a steady cough, and he built the original pole barn with his own 2 hands the same year. He died in that barn in 2017. Sudden, the way men in our family tend to go, and I bought my brothers out and moved my wife and our girl down from Raleigh the next spring. My name is Wade Kincaid. I run a small engine repair shop out of the pole barn my daddy raised. Lawnmowers, outboards, generators, the occasional vintage Briggs and Stratton that some retiree drove 4 hours to bring me. I served 8 years in the Navy Seabees before I came home, which is just a long way of saying I know how to fix things and how to keep my mouth shut while I do it. My wife Maren is the sheriff of Chatham County. She'll be 6 months in the office come October, the first woman to hold the seat. She'd been chief deputy for 9 years before that, and the election was a tight one. 22,000 votes to 21 and change. I worked her phone bank every Sunday for 3 months. We celebrated at our kitchen table with a bottle of Yingling and a frozen pizza because we'd given the babysitter the night off, and our daughter Pip was waiting up to ask if Mama was now allowed to drive the helicopter. Maren is not allowed to drive the helicopter. Pip is 6 and remains disappointed. In 2019, the developer Reed Vossler Crane bought the 80-acre tract on the other side of our western boundary line and broke ground on Heron Point at Jordan Lake. 64 luxury homes around an artificial cove, with a clubhouse, an infinity pool, and a 3-story stone gate that said Heron Point in iron letters big enough to land a Cessna on. The HOA president was Reed's sister-in-law, Cheryl Ann Vossler, who went by Cher Ann and drove a champagne Cadillac Escalade with a bumper sticker that said grace over grievance. She'd never met a grievance she didn't grace. For the first 18 months, Cher Ann sent us letters, 63 of them to be exact. I counted because I am, by both nature and trade, a man who counts. Letters about the color of my pole barn, the angle of my driveway, the noise of my air compressor, the sound of our daughter's swing set, the visibility of my outboard inventory from her clubhouse, the smell of my chicken coop, and a personal observation that my wife's department-issued Tahoe in our driveway was incompatible with the visual character of the lakefront community. I filed every letter in a green expandable folder labeled, in my daughter's wobbly handwriting, Mean Mail. I did not respond. Reed had been by twice with offers to buy the parcel. Both times I said no, kindly. Both times his smile got smaller around the edges. The morning everything changed was a Saturday in late April, the air thick with pollen, and the lake glassy under a low haze. Pip was at her grandmother's. Maren was off duty, in jeans and a faded denim button-down, working in the side yard with our German short-haired pointer Daisy, who had a habit of ignoring electric fences when she smelled a wood duck. Daisy spotted a duck. Daisy left. She crossed the boundary at the corner of our westernmost pasture, into the manicured greenbelt that ran along the back of Heron Point, just as Cher Ann Vossler was leading her morning Pilates posse on a power walk past the cul-de-sac. That's when the call to 911 went out. I was inside the barn rebuilding a Mercury 9.9 carb when I heard the first siren cut through the morning quiet, then a second, Then nothing for 20 seconds, then the metallic squawk of a radio coming up our gravel drive. I came out wiping my hands on a shop rag and saw 2 patrol cars angled across the front of the property, lights on, deputies stepping out with their hands resting on their belts. Behind them, in a champagne Escalade, parked sideways across the road, sat Sharon Vossler with a phone held up like a press badge. I walked toward the deputies the way you walk toward any deputy on your own land. Slow, hands visible, voice down. "Morning, deputy. I'm Wade Kincaid. This is my parcel. What's the call?" The senior deputy was Mark Greer, a man I'd known since high school baseball. He looked uncomfortable in a way I hadn't seen on him in 20 years. "Wade, we got a 911 call from Mrs. Vossler, reporting an active trespasser on the Heron Point Common area. White female, plain clothes, hostile. She was insisting we secure the suspect." "Where's the suspect?" "Over by the cul-de-sac fence. We were just about to go talk to her." I looked across the yard. Sharon had stepped out of her Escalade and was already striding up the drive, white sneakers crunching on my gravel, fluorescent visor pulled low. "There she is, officers." She pointed past us toward the side pasture. "She's been on our property for 15 minutes. She refused to identify herself. I want her detained. I want her cited." I held up one hand. "Sharon, that's my wife." "I don't care whose wife she is. She was on Heron Point property without authorization. Our bylaws are very clear." "Your bylaws don't apply to my parcel." "This is not your parcel. The Greenbelt is HOA common area." "The Greenbelt is my pasture. I have the survey. The fence post you're standing next to is mine." She shook her head with the practiced indignation of a woman who'd been told the word no maybe twice in her adult life. "Officers, I am the elected president of the Heron Point Homeowners Association, and I am formally requesting that you secure and detain that woman pending charges. You have a legal obligation." "Ma'am," Greer's voice was very flat. "Could you take a step back, please?" That was when Marin came around the corner of the barn with Daisy on her collar. She'd been close enough to hear the sirens. She had her field jacket over her shoulder, her hair in the working braid she wears when she's chasing a dog through brambles. Her badge was clipped to her belt the way she always wears it, even off duty, because that is the kind of woman my wife is. She walked up to the group, set Daisy at heel with a soft click of her tongue, looked at Greer first, then at Sharon, then back at Greer. "Mark." "Sheriff." The word landed in the gravel like a dropped wrench. Sharon's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her phone, which had been recording, drifted slowly down to her hip. "I'm sorry," she said, in a voice that had lost half its volume. "What did you call her?" Marin reached down and unclipped her badge. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, the way a magician shows a card. The morning sun caught the edge of the metal and threw a small, bright disk of light across Sharon's face. "Marin Kincaid, Sheriff of Chatham County, sworn in March 8th. I responded to my dog crossing a property line. You called 911 to report me as a hostile trespasser." She let the badge sit a moment longer, then clipped it back. "You and I are going to have a different conversation in a few weeks, Mrs. Vossler. I will not be the one having it, but you and I are going to have it." Sharon stood very still. The fluorescent visor cast a green stripe across her forehead. The phone was still recording. Greer cleared his throat, asked if anyone needed any further assistance, and then, slowly, gently, informed Mrs. Vossler that filing a knowingly false 911 report was a Class 2 misdemeanor in the state of North Carolina, and that he would be referring the call to the district attorney's office for review. She did not move while he spoke. Daisy sat down on her boots and panted. I watched a small bead of sweat slide down the side of Sharon's neck. I watched her composure go, 1 degree at a time, like a thermostat finally giving up. I did not smile. I had work to do. Sharon did not learn from the deputies. Sharon doubled down. By Monday afternoon, she had filed a written complaint with the North Carolina Sheriff's Standards Commission, alleging that my wife had abused her position by physically intimidating a private citizen and leveraging her badge for personal advantage during the Saturday incident. By Tuesday morning, she'd filed a parallel ethics complaint with the Chatham County Board of Commissioners. By Tuesday afternoon, she'd posted a 14-paragraph essay on the Heron Point community page titled, "When Law Enforcement Becomes Personal, a Crisis at Our Boundary." She included 2 photos. One was a long lens shot of our pole barn with the words, "Junkyard," superimposed in red. The other was an old campaign photo of Marin in uniform with the caption, "Is this who you trust to protect you?" I read the post on my phone in the kitchen and quietly forwarded it to Kirby Lansing, an attorney out of Pittsburgh that Marin had recommended back when the first complaint letter had arrived. Kirby was 62, soft-spoken, the kind of country lawyer who wore khakis to court and put juries at ease in the first 30 seconds. He read the post once, called me back, and laughed for a long time. "Wade, she just published defamation per se on a public access digital forum after filing a falsified police report against a sworn officer of the same county where you reside. I want screenshots of every one of those 63 letters by end of business today. I want screenshots of the post archived through Wayback Machine. I want a written statement from your wife about Saturday morning. And I want you to not, under any circumstances, respond to that post." I haven't. I know, I just like saying it out loud. By Thursday, Sharon had escalated again. A man in a Chatham County code enforcement polo arrived in our driveway with a clipboard and an apologetic expression and informed me that his office had received multiple complaints about an unpermitted commercial structure, meaning my pole barn, and a biohazard accumulation, meaning my chicken coop, which was clean enough to operate on. He had been instructed to issue a red tag on the pole barn pending inspection. His name was Earl Truitt, and he had played JV football with my younger brother. He looked at the barn, which was up to code in every measurable way, and he looked at his clipboard, and he looked at me, and he sighed. "Wade, I have to put the tag on, but I'm going to write the inspection date for 10 days out, and I am going to bring a state inspector with me, because the directive on this came from a county commissioner, and I don't want to be the man holding the pen on it." "Which commissioner, Earl?" "Commissioner Wendell Kohlmeyer." Kohlmeyer. I tried to remember where I'd heard that name. Then I did. He was on Reed Vossler Crane's investor sheet for Heron Point. He'd put in $300,000 at the development stage and held a 6% stake in the LLC. I called Kirby. Kirby went very quiet for a second and then started typing fast. I heard the click of his keyboard for a full minute. "Wade, don't talk to anyone from the county for the next 48 hours unless I'm on the call. I need to look at something." That same week, 3 more things happened. A noise inspector arrived without an appointment to measure the decibel level of my air compressor. He measured it at 61 decibels, which is roughly the volume of a refrigerator. He left. A certified letter from the Heron Point HOA's attorney arrived asserting that my pole barn encroached upon the easement granted to the association in the 2019 development plat and demanded I remove or relocate the structure within 30 days. And on the Sunday after that, somebody drove past our property at 4 in the morning and dumped 2 bags of household trash in the ditch at the corner of our drive. They left fast enough that the trail camera I'd put on the gate caught only the back of a champagne SUV with a license plate that read GRCOVRG. I bagged the trash. I logged the camera footage. I emailed it all to Kirby. I went out to the pole barn, fired up the lathe, and made a tool handle out of a piece of dogwood I'd been saving since my daddy died. I worked until my hands were steady. Then I came back inside, kissed the top of Pip's head while she colored at the kitchen table, and called Kirby back. "Tell me what you found." What Kirby had found was a hole in the ground. He'd pulled my parcel record from the Chatham County GIS portal and overlaid it on the older paper survey in his office, the one from 2002, when my daddy and I had walked the boundary with a county surveyor and pounded 13 fresh iron pins into the dirt. The 2 maps did not match. They didn't even come close. The county's online GIS now showed the western 4 acres of my farm, the lakefront slope where Old Man's Branch ran down to Jordan Lake, as part of a common area conservation parcel attached to Heron Point at Jordan Lake. The shaded polygon ran right through my pasture, my pole barn easement, and the bottom corner of my driveway. According to the official county digital map, 4 acres of land that my granddaddy bought in 1948 now belonged, on paper, to the HOA. How long has it been like this? I asked Kirby. The change was uploaded August 23, 2022, 2 years and change. There's no record of a recorded deed transfer, no quiet title action, no eminent domain proceeding, no county commission resolution. Somebody just changed the file. Can they do that? No, they can't, but somebody did. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that call. The sun was coming through the side window and falling on Marin's cold coffee mug, and the green folder labeled Mean Mail. I thought about how many title companies had pulled that GIS map in the last 2 years. How many appraisers? How many real estate listings? Every time a buyer ran the numbers on a parcel near mine, they were seeing a county map that quietly told them 4 acres of my family's land weren't mine anymore. I thought about what that does to a property's market value. I thought about what it does to a family that's been working the same 11 acres for 76 years. I thought about my daddy walking that boundary with me at 16, putting my hand on each iron pin, telling me that fences don't make good neighbors, paperwork does. Then I thought about Reed Vossler Crane's smile, getting smaller around the edges every time I'd said no. I drove down to the county tax office that afternoon and pulled the public access records on every parcel adjacent to Heron Point. There were 8 of them. 3 were owned by elderly widows, 2 were owned by small church trust holdings, 2 were owned by working farms run by men in their 70s. 1 was mine. I cross-referenced each parcel against the current GIS portal. 6 of the 8 parcels had been digitally trimmed. Not by much. A 1/4 acre here, a 1/2 acre there, a creek easement that suddenly belonged to the HOA, a road frontage that had been quietly absorbed. None of it big enough to trigger a lawsuit on its own. All of it sitting quietly on the official county map, depressing values, complicating sales, building towards something. I drove home and forwarded everything to Kirby in a single email with the subject line, "This is bigger than us." Kirby called me back inside of 20 minutes. "Wade, I'm bringing in the State Bureau of Investigation. This is no longer civil. This is public corruption, mapping fraud, and a likely RICO predicate on the development side. I'm also calling the sheriff's office. Marin is going to have to recuse formally, and we need her chief detective in the room." Marin already knows. I told her at lunch. "Of course you did." The next morning, Marin signed a 1-page recusal letter and walked it down the hall to Detective Lieutenant Bryson Tatum, who'd been her chief investigator for 6 years and who was, per her formal designation, now in charge of every aspect of any criminal matter relating to the Vossler family, the Heron Point HOA, or Vossler Crane Holdings LLC. Tatum read the letter, nodded once, and asked her exactly 2 questions. Did she trust him to do this right? And did she want a copy emailed to the district attorney that morning, or by close of business? She said yes, and that morning would be fine. I kissed her at the door and watched her drive off in the department Tahoe. Daisy sat at my feet the way she does when she knows something serious is in the air. The ground under us was about to move. The man at the center of the GIS fraud was named Walt Jessup. He was a 31-year-old county GIS technician who'd been hired in 2019 out of a community college mapping program. Soft-spoken, polite, the kind of young man who said yes ma'am to the parking attendant. He lived in a rented duplex in Siler City with his fiancée and a beagle. He had $63,000 in student loan debt. He had no criminal record. He had not, by any reasonable measure, started his career planning to commit a federal felony. What he had done, beginning in the summer of 2021, was accept a series of cash payments from a man identified in the SBI affidavit only as RVC, a resident of Wake County, in exchange for selective digital adjustments to the official Chatham County parcel maps. The payments came in envelopes left in the lockbox at a self-storage unit on Highway 64. Each adjustment paid between $800 and $3,000. Walt's beagle had needed a hip replacement. His fiancée had wanted a wedding venue overlooking the lake. Detective Tatum's team had Walt under interview within 48 hours of Kirby's referral. Walt cried inside of 15 minutes. He cooperated inside of an hour. By the end of the day, he had identified the storage unit, the cash drops, the email account he'd been instructed to use, and the man who'd recruited him at a county GIS conference in Asheville in 2021. The man's name was Reed Vossler Crane. Reed was indicted by a Wake County grand jury 11 days later on 23 counts, including wire fraud, bribery of a public official, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a state RICO predicate built around a dozen quietly trimmed parcels and 4 years of inflated lakefront sales. The federal U.S. Attorney's Office in Greensboro picked up the case for parallel federal charges before the month was out. Reed surrendered his passport and was placed on house arrest in his 5,000-square-foot home, overlooking the same artificial cove that Heron Point had carved into the western shore of Jordan Lake. The investigation also pulled, almost as a footnote, the call log for the Chatham County 911 Center, going back 4 years. Sharon Vossler had personally placed 17 911 calls in that period, not 14 the way I'd guessed. 3 reported suspicious vehicles that turned out to be school buses. 4 reported armed intruders who turned out to be utility meter readers. 1 reported a kidnapping in progress against a Hispanic landscaping crew working a contract 2 streets over. None of them had ever resulted in an arrest of the reported subject. All of them had cost the county thousands of taxpayer dollars in dispatched response time. Marin had been assembling a county-wide directive on chronic 911 abuse for 3 months before the call on her own front pasture went out. Sharon had not, of course, recognized her. Sharon had donated the maximum legal amount to Marin's opponent in the previous election and had not, since losing that race, bothered to learn the name or face of the woman who'd actually won. Pride is an interesting handicap. It blinds you to the only person in the county you needed to recognize. Detective Tatum signed off on the arrest warrants on a Wednesday afternoon. He chose, with the blessing of the DA, not to execute them immediately. He wanted the developer indicted federally first. He wanted the bribed GIS technician's grand jury testimony locked in. He wanted the civil suit Kirby was preparing for me filed and served. And he wanted one specific public moment, a county commission meeting at which Chair Ann Vossler had already petitioned to present. He looked at me across his desk and said, "Mr. Kincaid, I'm going to ask you to be patient for 16 more days." "Sheriff Tatum," I said, which earned a small, embarrassed cough. "I have been patient since 1948. 16 days is not, in the broad sweep of a Carolina summer, a long time. In the small sweep of a household waiting on a public reckoning, 16 days is the inside of a slow-cooked brisket." We did the work. Kirby filed 3 things in the first week. The first was a quiet title action in Chatham County Superior Court, asking the court to declare, on the record, that the 11-acre Kincaid parcel had never legally been transferred, encumbered, or absorbed by Heron Point at Jordan Lake or any related entity, and that the GIS adjustment of August 2022 was void from the moment of upload. The second was a civil suit against the HOA, the developer, and Chair Ann Vossler personally for slander of title, defamation per se, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with business. The air compressor noise inspector had cost me a contract with a marina out of New Hill that had read the Heron Point next door post and gotten cold feet. The third was a complaint filed with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission against the licensed property manager for Heron Point, who had countersigned the false common area encroachment letter. I built parallel files for the criminal investigators, the same way I'd built engine logs for the Navy in 2008. 3-ring binders, indexed tabs, color-coded receipts, trail camera footage on a labeled hard drive, the original 2002 paper survey in an archival sleeve, my daddy's handwritten notebook from 1976, listing every iron pin he'd ever set on the property, every certified letter from Chair Ann from the last 3 years, scanned, dated, cross-referenced. I added one more thing, on Marin's quiet suggestion. I called the state auditor's office and asked for the public records on Commissioner Wendell Kohlmeyer's financial disclosures. They came back showing his Heron Point stake, but not, oddly, the $300,000 investment from 2018. He had failed to report it. That was its own felony. I forwarded the discrepancy to Detective Tatum's email, with no commentary, because Tatum did not need any. I installed 2 more trail cameras on the road frontage and 1 inside the pole barn. I bought a half dozen 60mm game camera SD cards and a fireproof safe to keep them in. I posted a small, neat sign at the gate. Property monitored. Video and audio. NC. One-party consent. North Carolina is, in fact, a one-party consent state for audio recording, which meant any conversation a person had in my driveway was, with my consent alone, fair to record. Kirby had taught me that one in our second meeting, and he liked it so much he repeated it 3 times. The thing about quietly building a case is that it teaches you a kind of patience the rest of your life never asked for. I learned to do paperwork on the porch in the evenings, while Pip read aloud from her chapter book. I learned to take a deep breath every time the certified mail truck came up the drive. I learned to drink the coffee Marin made me, even when she'd put too much chicory in it. Sharon did not stop. People like Sharon do not stop. They escalate. 2 more letters arrived. One demanded I appear before the Heron Point Architectural Review Board to explain the color of my barn. Another threatened legal action if I did not remove the wooden picnic table I'd built for Pip's last birthday from a part of my own yard that, the letter claimed, was visually accessible from HOA common area. I forwarded both to Kirby. He added them to the file labeled, in his looping cursive, Exhibits C1 through C71. Maeve Daughtry, who lived 2 parcels to the north with her husband Junior and ran a small pottery studio out of their kiln shed, came by one afternoon with a Tupperware of squash casserole and a folder of her own. 11 letters from Sharon over 2 years. A noise complaint the HOA had filed against the kiln. A sightline violation against her clay drying racks. She'd been waiting for years for someone to listen. I introduced her to Kirby that same afternoon. By the end of the week, he had 4 additional clients on retainer. The civil suit, when it was filed and served, asked for damages in the low 7 figures. The criminal complaints, when they were sealed and held, named 11 counts. The county commission meeting, when it came around, was held on a Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. in the historic courthouse on East Street in Pittsboro. Sharon had 37 minutes on the agenda. She did not know that. 3 days before the commission meeting, Sharon tried to set fire to the rest of her own life. She did it the way she did everything, through a screen, with witnesses, in writing. She started at 6 in the morning with a 5,000-word email to every member of the Chatham County Board of Commissioners, the editor of the Pittsboro Pilot, the regional director of the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, the executive director of the State Ethics Commission, and the Speaker of the North Carolina House. The subject line was, Urgent. Sheriff Marin Kincaid has conducted a personal vendetta against a concerned community leader. The email accused Marin of weaponizing her badge against private citizens, directing investigators to fabricate evidence, engaging in a coordinated harassment campaign in concert with her husband, and, this was the line that made Kirby spit his coffee when I read it to him over the phone, operating a clandestine surveillance ring out of an unpermitted pole barn on county-adjacent land. I had a registered, county-permitted, fully insured small engine repair business. The pole barn was on my own private property. The cameras were on my own private property. There was no surveillance ring. Daisy knocked over a tripod once. By 8 a.m., Sharon had filed a parallel complaint with the State Ethics Commission, alleging that Detective Lieutenant Tatum was, despite Marin's recusal, acting on personal direction from the sheriff. By 9 a.m., she had posted the entire email to the Heron Point next door, with a link to a GoFundMe titled, Defend Our Community from Government Overreach. By 10, the GoFundMe had raised $900 from 16 donors. I sat at the kitchen table reading it on my phone with Marin beside me drinking coffee. She did not change her expression once. When she finished, she set down her mug, kissed me on the temple, said, "We're getting close," and went out to start the Tahoe. That afternoon, Sharon went outside. She drove her Escalade onto our easement road, the half-mile gravel spur that connects our driveway to the county road, parked it sideways across the entrance, got out with a clipboard, and began photographing my pole barn from 20 feet inside my property line. She did not knock. She did not call. She had a fluorescent visor on, a polo shirt that said, Heron Point Art Committee, and a posture that said she believed photographs taken from my driveway would somehow protect her in court. I stayed in the barn. I watched her on the camera feed. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported a trespasser. Deputy Greer arrived in under 12 minutes, escorted Sharon off my property in the slow, methodical way deputies escort women they cannot arrest yet, and informed her, very clearly, that any further trespass would result in immediate citation and possible arrest pending the open criminal investigation. She drove off without speaking. The Escalade left a long, curving rut in my gravel. The next day, a man arrived at our gate with a manila envelope. He was bearded, 40-ish, in a Carhartt vest and dark jeans. He had a Chatham County PI license clipped to his belt, properly displayed, and an expression that suggested he wished he were anywhere else. He handed me the envelope, said, "Mr. Kincaid, I'm here to deliver service of process and to inform you that I'm under contract with a third party that I am not at liberty to name. But I think you should know that I'm being asked to do things I don't want to do." And then he turned and walked back to his truck. Inside the envelope was a poorly drafted civil complaint from Sharon personally, suing me for harassment because Greer had escorted her off my driveway. The PI's name was Travis Headley. I wrote it down. I would remember it. 2 days before the commission meeting, my trail camera at the fence line caught Travis Headley climbing over my eastern fence at 4:13 in the morning. He carried a black duffel bag. He moved slowly, flashlight off, the way a man moves when he has been hired to do something illegal and is trying to convince himself he is still a good person. He stopped at the corner of my back pasture, opened the duffel, and began removing potted plants, 6 of them, marijuana, 12 to 15 inches tall, and pressing them into the soft dirt at the base of my back fence. I did not stop him. I let him work. I let him plant all 6. I let him photograph each one with his own phone, presumably for later discovery. Then I let him climb back over the fence and drive off. I called Detective Tatum at 5:02 a.m. He laughed for a long time. Tatum and his team picked Travis Headley up at his apartment in Sanford by 7 that morning. Travis was eating Frosted Flakes at his kitchen table when the deputies knocked. He did not require any persuasion. He gave a complete written statement before 9, identifying Sharon Vossler as the person who had hired him 3 weeks earlier, paid him $1,100 in cash, provided him with the marijuana plants from a supplier in Wake County she had not named, and instructed him to plant them on my property, in a discoverable location, so that an anonymous tip she planned to phone in could result in my arrest before the commission meeting. Travis signed the statement. He waived his right to counsel. He asked Tatum if there was any way the cooperation could help his license. Tatum said maybe, and that depended on whether Travis would also testify in open court. Travis said yes before the question finished. By noon, the SBI had executed a search warrant at the Vossler home and recovered Sharon's burner phone, which contained a text message thread with Travis Headley, dating back to the afternoon Greer had escorted her off my driveway. The thread included photographs of my back fence, a hand-drawn map of my pasture, and a final text from Sharon at 3 a.m. that read, "Make sure they're visible from the gate." It was a confession in 17 words. By 2 p.m., the burner phone search had also recovered 3 months of correspondence between Sharon and her brother-in-law Reed, planning the Heron Point Phase 2 Shoreline Conservation Easement presentation at the upcoming commission meeting. The presentation, it turned out, was not really about a conservation easement. It was a request that the county exercise its eminent domain authority over 6 adjacent parcels, including mine, to facilitate the second phase of Heron Point development. Reed had been planning to argue, on the basis of the falsified GIS map, that the parcels were already partially absorbed into the existing HOA common area, and that a formal eminent domain action would be a procedural courtesy rather than a substantive taking. Sharon was scheduled to read the petition into the public record on Tuesday evening at 6:07. Tatum and the district attorney decided to let her. She did not yet know that her brother-in-law had been formally indicted on Monday morning, that her own arrest warrant had been signed and was sitting in Tatum's desk drawer, that Walt Jessup had been transferred into protective custody as a federal cooperator, that her husband Bryce had quietly retained a separate criminal defense attorney to distance himself from her, or that her own children, both adults living out of state, had stopped answering her phone calls 4 days earlier. She also did not yet know that the Pittsburgh Pilot had been working a parallel investigation, that the Raleigh News and Observer had picked up the lead, that an environmental reporter from WRAL was confirmed to attend the commission meeting with a camera operator, and that 2 seats in the third row had been reserved for federal observers from the U.S. Attorney's Office. What she did know, on the Monday before the meeting, was that her ethics complaint against my wife had been dismissed without prejudice by the State Commission for lack of any cited specific misconduct, that her noise complaint against Maeve Daughtry's pottery kiln had been thrown out by the County Environmental Health Office for the 3rd time, and that her latest filing in Heron Point Architectural Review against my pole barn had been returned to her with a handwritten note from the volunteer ARC vice chair, saying that the committee had voted unanimously to refuse to consider any further filings related to the Kincaid parcel until the open criminal investigation concluded. She responded by writing one final letter, which she hand-delivered to my mailbox at 5 p.m. on Monday. The letter was a single page. It was typed in 12-point Arial. It began, "Mr. Kincaid, I want to extend a sincere offer of resolution, given the unfortunate misunderstandings of recent weeks." It went on to propose that I voluntarily transfer 4 acres of my western pasture to the Heron Point HOA in exchange for her dropping all pending complaints and providing me with a clean slate going forward. It was signed in looping royal blue ink, the same color of ink she had used on every certified letter she'd ever sent me. I read the letter once. I read it twice. I drove it to Kirby's office and put it in his hand. He looked at it. He looked at me. He said one word: Tuesday. The Pittsburgh Courthouse on East Street is a brick and limestone building from 1881, with white columns and a cupola that catches the last light of any day worth remembering. The County Commission chamber is on the 2nd floor, accessed by a wide staircase with a polished oak handrail my granddaddy had once helped strip and refinish in 1962. The room holds about 140 people, with another 50 in the overflow at the back. By 5:45 on Tuesday evening, every seat was taken. By 5:50, the overflow was full. By 6, people were standing along the walls. Marin came in at 5:57, in full Class A uniform, hat under her arm, badge bright on her chest. She did not sit in the audience. She walked to the back wall and stood beside Detective Tatum, who was in a Navy suit, and 3 federal observers in dark suits with U.S. Attorney lapel pins. The WRAL camera was set up at the side aisle. The Pittsburgh Pilot reporter was in the front row with a recorder and a steno pad. I sat in the 2nd row, 3rd seat, with Kirby beside me. Maeve Daughtry sat behind me, with Junior. Pip was at her grandmother's. I had told her there would be a school day for grown-ups in town. Sharon arrived at 6:04 in a peach linen suit and pearls, carrying a leather portfolio. She did not look at the back wall. She did not see Marin. She walked straight up the center aisle to the public petitioner's lectern and tapped the microphone twice with a manicured nail. The chair of the commission, an older black woman named Marlene Pritchard, who had served 3 terms and was the first person ever elected to chair that body, called the meeting to order at 6:06. The minutes were approved. Old business was gavelled through. At 6:14, Chair Pritchard called Cheryl Ann Vossler to the lectern for her petition. Sharon stood up straight. She opened her portfolio. She began. Honorable Commissioners, distinguished guests, neighbors. Tonight, I come before you not as a homeowner, but as a steward of one of Chatham County's most treasured natural resources, the western shore of Jordan Lake. The Heron Point community has, since 2019, served as a model of responsible lakefront development. I have, as a matter of personal philosophy, tried to stop watching people humiliate themselves once it becomes clear they are going to. But there is no looking away from the moment a person stands at a lectern and reads aloud the petition that proves their own case against them. I watched Sharon read for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She talked about conservation. She talked about shoreline protection. She talked about the importance of integrating non-conforming legacy parcels into a unified stewardship framework. She named me, by name, as a parcel owner whose land the proposed easement would incorporate. At 6:18, when she got to the line about voluntary cooperation, she paused for effect and looked up. Marlene Pritchard cleared her throat. "Mrs. Vossler, I'm going to interrupt you for one moment. I see we have a representative of law enforcement at the back of the room who has signaled to be recognized." Sharon turned. She saw Marin. She saw the uniform. She saw the badge. She saw the federal observers. She saw the Pittsburgh Pilot reporter writing. Her hands began to tremble against the leather portfolio. Marin walked up the center aisle, slowly, the way she has walked into every room she has ever needed to take command of. Tatum walked beside her. 2 deputies waited at the side door. Marin reached the lectern. She did not interrupt. She waited until Sharon turned and faced her, and then she said, in a voice the microphone caught very clearly, "Mrs. Vossler, I'm Sheriff Marin Kincaid. We met briefly in April. I'm here this evening on behalf of the Chatham County Sheriff's Office and pursuant to a duly executed warrant signed by a Wake County Superior Court judge." She lifted a single, folded document. "You are under arrest on the following charges: filing a knowingly false report to law enforcement, 6 counts; conspiracy to commit fraud, 4 counts; solicitation to commit criminal trespass, 1 count; solicitation to manufacture and distribute a controlled substance, 1 count; conspiracy to commit eminent domain fraud against the citizens of Chatham County, 1 count; tampering with a public record, 1 count. You have the right to remain silent." The room did not breathe. Sharon's portfolio slipped from her hands and hit the lectern with a soft thump. She tried to say something. She tried to look at Marlene Pritchard. She tried to look at her own attorney, who was not in the room because she had not, until that moment, believed she would need one. The deputies stepped forward. They cuffed her hands gently in front of her body. Tatum read the rest of the warrant aloud. The cameras rolled. Marin stood beside the lectern in full uniform, hat back on her head now, eyes level, hands folded in front of her, until the deputies walked Sharon past my row and down the center aisle and out the side door of the chamber. The whole arrest took 2 minutes and 40 seconds. When the door closed, Marlene Pritchard tapped her gavel once. "Mr. Kincaid, the chair recognizes you for public comment." I stood up. I walked to the lectern with my daddy's pocket compass in my left hand, the brass one he had carried in Korea in 1953 and given to me the day I left for Great Lakes in 2000. I set it on the wood beside the microphone. I unfolded a single sheet of paper. "My name is Wade Kincaid. I am a 4th-generation landowner on the western shore of Jordan Lake. My granddaddy bought our parcel in 1948. My daddy raised the pole barn in 1956. My wife and I are raising our daughter on the same 11 acres. I am here tonight because someone tried to take 4 of those acres, on paper, without my knowledge, and use the falsified record to depress our property value and engineer an eminent domain seizure for private profit." The room was silent enough to hear the cooling fan in the back of the WRAL camera. "I am not here for revenge. I am here to ask the commission to do 3 things." I lifted my hand and counted them off. 1. Restore every digitally trimmed parcel boundary along the western shore of Jordan Lake to its true legal description by emergency resolution before the next county GIS update. 2. Adopt a county ordinance establishing criminal penalties for any HOA officer who knowingly files a false 911 call against a private citizen. 3. Authorize the county to accept the donation of 6 acres of my own western lakefront pasture, including frontage on Old Man's Branch, for the establishment of a public access fishing pier and shoreline park, to be permanently named in honor of my father, Hank Kincaid, who served his country in Korea and built every fence post on this parcel with his own hands. Marlene Pritchard tapped her gavel softly. All 3 motions are noted. The chair will entertain them at the close of public comment. I sat down. The applause did not come from politeness. It came from a room that had just watched a slow, patient man do what he came to do. In the weeks that followed, the rest happened quickly. Reed Vossler Crane took a federal plea agreement in late summer and is currently serving 46 months at FCI Butner. Sharon Vossler went to trial in November. The jury was out under 4 hours. She is serving 15 months at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh and owes over $1.2 million in restitution and civil damages, which she does not have. Because the Heron Point HOA was placed in court-supervised receivership the month after her arrest. Commissioner Wendell Kohlmeyer resigned his seat the morning after the meeting. Walt Jessup, the GIS technician, accepted a cooperator agreement and now works at a wildlife mapping nonprofit in western North Carolina. The Hank Kincaid Memorial Fishing Pier opened on the first Saturday of June. 120 feet of treated cedar, ADA accessible the entire length, with 3 turnouts wide enough for wheelchairs and a small bronze plaque that reads, "Built by hands, for hands." The first official cast was made by a Marine from Goldston, who'd lost both legs above the knee in Helmand and had been waiting 8 years for a public pier he could roll onto. Pip baited his hook. He caught a 2-pound largemouth in 9 minutes. Marin served hot dogs in her uniform. The Pittsburgh Pilot ran the photo on the front page of the Sunday edition. The mean mail folder sits in a drawer in my office now, closed for good. The picnic table I built for Pip's birthday is still in the side yard. On our western boundary, where Sharon once stared across at our pasture, Marin and Pip and I planted 14 native bald cypress saplings on a Saturday morning in October, one for each false 911 call she ever made. If your HOA is stealing land on a county map, write it down. Photograph the boundary, pull the survey, find your Kirby, find your Tatum. The petty tyrants of the world cannot survive a folder, a camera, and a calm voice. Tell me your story in the comments below. Where are you watching from? And what did your HOA try to take from you? Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The next story I have for you involves a small-town diner, a stolen recipe, and a quiet old line cook in eastern Kentucky who waited 11 years to hand someone the menu they deserved. Pull up a chair.
What stayed with me about Wade Kincaid's story isn't the best moment, even though the best moment is satisfying enough to play on a loop. What stayed with me is what Chair Ann Bosler couldn't see. She has spent 3 years in the same county as the woman who would eventually arrest her, and she never bothered to learn the new sheriff's name. She never looked up. She wrote 63 letters and made 17 911 calls and stormed 4 acres on a map, and never once stopped to think that the world might be larger than her clubhouse. That's the gist of every HOA Karen story I tell you on this channel. Petty tyrants do not lose because they are outsmart. They lose because they refuse to look at the people they're standing across from. Wait, look. Wait, count. Wait, kept the paper. Wait, made the call. Marin were the best and waited. If you are quietly being pushed by a Karen with a clipboard, write the date down, photograph the boundary, pull the survey, find your Kirby, find your Tater. Drop a comment below if any of this sound like your blog. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. A small town dinner, a stolen receipt, an Eastern Kentucky line cook who waited 11 years for the right moment. I'll see you there.